Welcome, everyone. It's a Wrap with Rap. I'm your host, Ron Rappaport. Before we start, I would like to thank all of our listeners, supporters, and sponsors that have helped to make this podcast so successful. The podcast is being heard in all 50 states, all provinces of Canada, and over 70 countries around the world. The podcast has been ranked by FeedSpot as one of the top 35 overcoming adversity podcasts on the web from thousands in that category, and is ranked by traffic, social media followers, and content freshness. Please visit the podcast website, itsawrapwithrap.com, for all the episodes and other information regarding the podcast, and to order logo merchandise, of which a portion of sales is donated to various charities, and to sign up for our email. This podcast features people who have overcome life's challenges and adversities, and people who can inspire, motivate, and educate us on an assortment of topics. My guest today is Dan Clouser. Dan is an author, podcast host, speaker, coaching trainer, and consultant. He founded and ran a nonprofit youth sports organization for 30 years called the Berkshire Baseball and Softball Club, which later became the Big Vision Foundation in Reading, Pennsylvania. He ran teams, tournaments, and a 130-acre sports complex, doing what he loved, working with kids and teaching them leadership skills and life lessons through sports and community service. In 2019, he felt a calling from God, decided to leave his comfort zone and start a new journey with his wife and dog, selling most of their material things and setting out across the country in an RV, conducting coaching workshops, meeting people who are doing things to make this world a better place. We will showcase Dan's journey. Welcome, Dan, to the podcast.
Thanks, Ron. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Let's start off, Dan, at the beginning. Tell us about yourself and what you have been doing prior to your huge transition in life.
So I started a youth nonprofit organization when I was 20 years old. It actually didn't start out as a youth nonprofit organization. It actually started out as an adult baseball organization for a bunch of buddies from high school and college to just kind of continue, reliving their glory days, so to speak. And as we all got older and started coaching ourselves and getting more involved in the youth component of sports, we were all kind of coaching at these different organizations. Ended up coaching against each other in many instances, but then we were still playing with each other. And we just kind of got around and talked and said, you know what, we all have the same philosophy, the same coaching philosophy. Why don't we kind of bring it all under that Berkshire umbrella and add a youth component to the organization? And we did that about 10 years into the organization in 1999, and it just kind of blossomed from there. And it just took on a whole new meaning for all of us, really, to do that work. And we all took the approach of it was more about teaching life lessons than it was the wins and losses on the field.
Right.
We were very competitive. We won a lot of league championships, a lot of tournament championships, but that was never really the end goal. The number one goal was to make sure that we were preparing these kids to go into the real world, because at some point, the game of baseball and softball are going to pass you by. Doesn't matter how good you are. Doesn't matter if you get to the professional level, the major league level. At some point, the game is just going to say, you know what, I'm done with you. I'm moving on to somebody younger and more talented than what you are. And at that point, you need to understand how to be a productive member of society. So that was really our main goal. And probably one of our my and my wife's biggest blessings right now to our traveling and getting to move about the country here is I've got players who are literally scattered across the country, and now being able to reconnect with them, that they're adults, and seeing what they're doing in the world has been really special, and has really kind of reaffirmed that the work we were doing was well worth the time that we'd put in.
Did you always instill in your players back then, there's got to be a winner, there's got to be a loser, it's a game, and it's just a game, and when the game's over, we have to go on with real life? Is that what you pretty much
Absolutely
instilled?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the game of baseball and softball, I mean, it's a game of failure to start with, so it's real. There's a whole lot of life lessons. I mean, there's life lessons in every sport, but I just feel that in baseball, they're just that much more prevalent, because it is such a game of failure. If you fail 70% of the time, you're still going to be considered a huge success in the game of baseball. So um, it,
Yeah.
it really is modeled to be able to teach those life lessons. And sadly, there's not enough coaches out there today that are doing that. They've got their eye on, a weekend tournament trophy or a medal that, quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's nice in the moment, but at the end of the day, that's not what it's all about. And like I said, we won plenty of championships, and we stepped on the field and played to win every time. But it was really, that wasn't the ultimate goal. If we ended up losing, we'd try to find whatever lesson there was in that loss to teach the kids so that they could go out and do better the next time.
It must aggravate you a lot when you see on the news parents getting into fights with the umpires and fights among themselves. It's just, to me, it just makes no sense.
It's a complete loss of perspective. I just saw a video that's kind of gone viral recently where, I don't know, I think it was a 14-year-old baseball game where third base coach came charging in from the coach's box and tried to tackle the umpire for a missed ball or strike call. You just sit there and like, man, what is going on?
I don't
What
know.
is going
Yeah.
on? It is. It's just a complete loss of perspective, and it's a shame because these are the people who are supposed to be teaching the kids, to do
Yeah.
things the right way. So if
Yeah.
you're doing that in front of a team of 12 or 14 kids, what lessons are they learning from that?
Yeah. We need more coaches like you, that's for sure. Dan, what inspired you to sell your home, your possessions, and buy an RV and travel around the country? What inspired you to do that?
It's kind of a funny story. I loved what I did. I loved what I did in the organization. Loved working with kids, and we were doing great work. We were changing lives. But in early 2019, I had taken two road trips by myself. One was from Pennsylvania to Dallas for the annual ABCA convention, the American Baseball Coaches Association convention. And when I left Dallas, I actually didn't go directly back to Pennsylvania. I swung down through Louisiana and caught up with some friends of mine that we had done some softball camps with over the years, and then drove back to Pennsylvania. About a month later, I again took another solo trip, this time from Pennsylvania down to Orlando, Florida. Um, on the way down there, I stopped in Atlanta to see one of my old players, who is now working at Georgia State in the intramural athletic program there, and got to catch up with him, and then just again went to Orlando. I was down there to kind of we were getting ready to partner with Ali Krieger to do some soccer camps at our complex, and was down there, spent the weekend with them, drove back, and those were the first two times in my life where I actually took the time to enjoy the journey as opposed to worrying about making sure I was getting to the destination on time. As an organization, we traveled quite a bit, but it was never about the journey. It was, we're on a bus. Many times we'd take our whole organization to tournaments. We'd have three buses of kids, so
Yeah.
so there was nothing enjoyable about that journey. I mean, it was enjoyable with the kids and everything, but like it was a strict schedule. Like we had to be at the Old Country Buffet by 8:30 in the morning. We had 45 minutes to get the kids in and out for breakfast, and then get them back on the bus and make sure we were at the complex we were playing at by noontime or whatever the case was. So it was always about just a real regimented schedule and that sort of thing. So this was a time where I actually got to enjoy the journey. On the way to Dallas, I stopped in Memphis, spent the day in Memphis, and to give a little bit more background, my mom back in the 80s took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, took the back seat out of it, put a sheet of plywood in there and a mattress, and kind of turned it into quasi RV and traveled all around the country, just, meeting people and doing volunteer work. She volunteered with hurricane relief efforts all over Florida. She went up to Ground Zero and volunteered after 9/11. And, she was always about enjoying the journey. She never took an interstate. She was always on, a secondary highway or something like that. And I kind of had this aha moment during those two road trips where, it hit me. It was like, wow, I think I've actually, now almost 20 years after my mom had passed, really understood why she did what she did. Like I always respected her. I love telling people stories about her after she passed, about the volunteer work she did and how she did, you know, I mean, for a single woman at that point to be traveling, by herself,
Yeah.
in that day and age was pretty amazing. So I'd love telling the stories, but I always envisioned it that that was her story, that it would never be my story. And then when I got back from those road trips, I was in the process of adding some new chapters to the book that I'd originally published back in 2012. But with the work I was doing, it was really difficult to really sit down and write. And when I got back from those two road trips, I'd written like I hadn't written in years, knocked out like 4 or 5 chapters, and just kind of found this new inspiration. And really at that point, kind of started hearing a voice that it was time to close this chapter that I was in and open a new chapter. And at first, I resisted. I wasn't keen to that idea. Again, this is an organization I'd started. I'd spent 30 years of my life at that point. I was 50 years old. So, literally 60% of my life I dedicated to this organization.
Yeah.
Um, I just, I kind of finally surrendered to the idea. And then I ran it by my wife, and she thought I'd completely lost my mind.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that.
So she, and she kind of said the same thing that I'd thought. It was like, you know what? That was your mom's story. It's not going to be, it's not our story. But after a while, she had some things happening professionally, at her employer as well. And she was beginning to get more and more frustrated with it as time went on. Whereas that she was told we're going to be open for weren't opening, and there was just a constant kind of delaying game. And she came home finally one day and she said, "All right, I'm in. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's make the plans to do this." And so we started informing my organization what was going to go on. Kind of came up with an exit strategy, and then in 2020 we put it all in motion and put the house up on the market. And then COVID hit, and we took the house off the market. we
Right.
we ended up still buying an RV because we had a really good deal on a 2019 leftover RV, where we saved over $30,000 from the original sticker price on it. So the plan of selling the house, buying the RV, and not having any debt, quickly turned into having an RV sitting in the yard, and the house off the market, a mortgage and an RV payment, with a whole lot of uncertainty
Well, that
in the air
backfired.
with COVID. Yeah, yeah, but there was still this strange sense of peace as we were doing it, that it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, when the real estate market opened up again in Pennsylvania, I think 10 days after the market opened up, we had an agreement of sale on the house. And in August of that year, we hit the road, and we've been loving every minute of it since.
You mentioned your mom doing this in the 80s. Uh, Tell us how she pulled it off. She was married, and some of what her journeys were like. I know she did volunteer work across the country, but I know you have a little story about her 9/11 experience. Can you
Yeah.
share that with us?
So actually, yeah. So just give a little more background. She actually wasn't married when she started the journey.
Okay.
She was in a relationship with a person who became my stepfather later, who was a retired colonel in the army.
Okay.
And when she told him what she wanted to do, his response was, "Well, Loretta, I love your ambition. I love, that you want to do this, but truthfully, um, I did all my traveling for the military. Like I have no ambition to hop in a car and drive around the country. Like I did mine on Uncle Sam's dime, you know.
Right.
And she responded and said, "Well, oh no, you don't understand, Gene. I'm not inviting you. I'm just letting you know what I'm doing."
I'm telling you.
So he was a little uneasy about that, but finally bought into it. Um, and so she left Florida and drove across the southern U.S. Got into L.A. and he actually flew to L.A. and they drove down to Tijuana and got married.
Okay.
Drove back to L.A. He got on a plane back to Florida. She drove up the Pacific Coast Highway um, through Canada up into Alaska. But now she's actually the wife of a retired military veteran. So she had health benefits now. She could go to any military base and shop at the commissary, go to the
Right.
PX and all that sort of stuff. So it kind of eased his anxiety about her doing what she was doing much more. So the first couple of years of their marriage, they'd see each other a couple weeks a year.
Wow.
But
But he was supportive. He was supportive of all
he
this.
was
Yeah.
he was supportive of it.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so when 9/11 came around, she'd been hadn't been traveling full time at that point anymore. She was working as a drug and alcohol counselor, ran her own halfway house down in Titusville, Florida, um, and just did a lot of work for the Salvation Army. So, like when a hurricane would come in, she would be part of that group to be out there feeding the other volunteers. So when after 9/11, she just felt a need that she needed to be up there and help. So she left. I want to say shortly after the first of the year, so it wasn't like she was there at the very beginning after everything had happened. But I mean, it was such a disaster that there was a lot of work to still be done. So
Sure.
she got up there a little bit into 2002, and she was there for about 6 or 8 months, and again worked in the meal tent. I don't know what the official name was for it, but um, she would she'd serve meals for those who were still out there working in the rubble. We actually went up and visited her on Mother's Day of 2002, and because she had her Salvation Army badge and everything, she got us into places that we wouldn't have been able to get into. And I still remember this one church that we went into, and just right as you walked in the door, it was a place where a lot of the firefighters and responders would just kind of go to and decompress. They'd just sit there, they'd pray, they'd cry, they'd do whatever they had to do to kind of just keep their wits about them.
Yeah.
And when you walked in the doors of this place, like it just felt so heavy. um and I remember as we were leaving mentioning that to my mom about how heavy it felt. She said, well, if you thought it was heavy today, like you should be there in a day where they find a body, or find a body part. And again, it's one of those things that you heard about on the news, but until you hear about it from someone that's that close to you, and understanding that this is now May of 2002 and this happened in September of 2001, and they're still pulling bodies and body parts out of that rubble. It just gave it a new perspective, I think, for all of us at that point. um, when she took us back to the Salvation Army tent, and we had lunch with her, like everybody there, um, she'd make sure she'd introduce my brother and I to all of her friends that she was working with, and they all called her mom. Like every single one of those people called her mom, and that was just that's the way she was. When my brother's adult soccer team, everybody on the team called her mom. When my
Yeah.
brother was in the army, and he'd bring 3 or 4 jihadis home, with them on leave. By the end of the weekend, they're all calling her mom. And that's just the way she was. She really turned into everybody's mom.
Wow. That's a great story. Uh,
Yeah,
tell
she was
us.
an amazing woman.
Yeah, she sounds amazing. Dan, what experience did you have in the RV world when you started this? did you know a lot about RVs, or was this just something you jumped into and started
I
learning?
I I knew nothing about RVs.
Absolutely nothing.
First time I ever drove an RV was the day I drove this thing off the lot. Um, had no experience, literally jumped in with both feet, didn't know what a black tank was, a gray tank was, fresh tank, none of that stuff. Um, but the one thing that's really cool about the RV community is there's some amazing people out there who are willing to help out and give you advice. And YouTube has been an enormous asset as well. If there's something that goes wrong, um, there's generally a video out there about how you can make it right. So, but no, had absolutely no experience with RVing. It's not like my wife and I went camping on weekends throughout our entire marriage or anything like that. Um, I did some tent camping when I was a kid for our church youth group. My wife did some family tent camping when she was a kid as well, but that was it. Never drove an RV, never spent a night in an RV, um, and we've been learning on the go ever since.
But your wife bought into this thing.
She did, she did, and if you talk to her today, um, she is all in. She absolutely loves it. Loves the ability to make plans on the fly if we have to. The people we've met have been amazing. We do a lot of volunteer work ourselves. We volunteer
Yeah.
for an organization called A Year to Volunteer, which is a RV centric volunteer organization, and we've just met some of the most amazing people through
Yeah,
that organization.
we're gonna get
Um,
into that. Uh I think this was something that in the back of your mind you must have known spiritually this was just something you were intended to do. Am I right?
yeah, yeah, definitely now as I reflect, and it's funny, I talked about that trip I took to Orlando that was part of the inspiration to doing this. And when I was
Right.
down there, I spent a lot of time with two of my cousins, and my one cousin said to me on that trip, she says, I can see you doing what your mom did someday. And I was like, Patty, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And sure enough, another month or two later is when it really kind of started weighing on me to do that. And
Never
like I
say
said,
never.
even with yeah, yeah, and even with COVID and all the stuff, like I said, having a mortgage and the RV payment at the same time, like it just, you know, when you talk about the spirituality of it, like it just still felt right, even
Yeah.
with kind of all that uncertainty that was going. There's
You,
just
you
this
just took the
sense
words
of
out of my
peace.
mouth. I was gonna say it must have just felt right.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
it absolutely did.
Dan, tell us about your first road trip with the RV. You're in the RV, you know nothing about RVs, and you're driving this, I assume, pretty large vehicle. What was
It's 33 foot, so 33-foot Class C, and our first road trip was actually down the Blue Ridge Parkway. We left our daughter's house out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and just hopped on the Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park and went down the Blue Ridge Parkway. We drove from again just north of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to Lynchburg, Virginia, that first day, which we quickly learned was probably too far, um, because we ended up getting into the campground right around 7 o'clock, right about dusk. Um, so the first time hooking the RV up, I was doing it in the dark, which even now with a little over 3 years under our belts is still not fun. So we quickly learned that was probably too much of a chunk to do in a day.
yeah.
But we got into this campground in Lynchburg and had a heck of a time getting the RV level. Um, just we didn't have a great site at that particular campground, so it took a while to get it level. And we were setting up in the dark. Um, we hadn't eaten yet at that point, so my wife just quickly made spaghetti because it was the quickest thing, to actually, so I think by the time we ate dinner, it was like 8 o'clock at night at that point.
Right.
Um, but even so, we loved it. We got up the next morning and hit the Parkway again, and then from there we went to Fancy Gap, Virginia, which is just above the North Carolina line, and just that section. Um, I mean, we probably stopped at just about every single lookout that you could possibly stop, and took pictures from the Parkway and from the lookouts, and just again enjoyed the journey.
Yeah.
It was so cool. Um, we ended up doing the whole thing down to Cherokee, North Carolina, and then came back up to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Um, and we actually went back to Pennsylvania. So this whole thing was about just under 2 weeks. We ended up going back to Pennsylvania and spent Labor Day weekend with our family, most of our family up at in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania, at our daughter and son-in-law's hunting camp that they have up there. And when we left there, we ended up going to Louisiana and Texas, and that was actually right after Hurricane Laura had hit. So we kind of quickly found ourselves following my mom's footsteps again because we went down there and
Yeah.
helped with some hurricane relief in Sulphur and Lake Charles, Louisiana. And we got some friends that lived down there, and again, it was when I heard my mom telling the stories about her experiences with disaster relief was one thing, but then when you experience it yourself, it's just a whole different schematic. And seeing these people that were there who they too had lost just about everything from
Sure.
the storm
Yeah.
were still out there helping others who, like we stayed in the friend's driveway and she was apologizing to us that we couldn't plug in our electric to her house because she had no electric. We were like, Jenny, it's fine. You got your generator for the house right now. You worry about that. We've got a generator in the RV. We will
Yeah.
be fine. Please do not apologize because the
Right.
storm wiped you out of electric.
Right.
Um, and we met this woman from Houston who came in to help, and her and I, ended up going from one distribution area that we're helping with to another to bring more supplies over. And we were talking on our way there and back. And I'd asked her, what brought you into town? What made you want to come over and help? And she's like, well, when Hurricane Harvey came through a few years ago and really tore up Houston, a lot of people from this area came into Houston and helped us. She said, so I felt it was my obligation to
Sure.
come back and help them because they helped us in our greatest time of need. And just seeing that, that human spirit, just it's refreshing.
Oh,
We live in such
absolutely.
a polarized world and such a crazy world of, everybody in their own silos. When you see, it's sad that it takes a disaster to see that good part of human nature.
Yeah.
And I just wish at some point we would learn as human beings that we don't need the disaster, that we could actually be like this all the time. So
Exactly.
fingers
Exactly.
crossed that we figure that one out
Wouldn't that
sometime
be
soon.
nice? Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
what were some of the objectives of what you and your wife wanted to accomplish by living your new lifestyle? And did you have a plan in mind when you started out?
So the plan was definitely to write more. Um, so I did republish that first book in 2020. Or I'm sorry, in 2021. And then I wrote my second book, which is titled The Journey of My Mother's Son, which is the same title of my podcast. Um, and that was published in 2022. And then I did my third book that was released in May of 2023, which is actually my first step into the children's book genre, which is a children's book written as though our dog was the author, and his perspective of living in the RV full time, or as he calls it, the house on wheels. So that was the plan, was to certainly write more, and and do more speaking. And we've definitely accomplished both those roles. I'd like to do even more speaking than what I'm doing right now, but that'll all come. Um, and I'm still writing, so I'm working on actually a coloring book, um, which will be out in December of 2023, probably actually once this gets released, which again is the dog's perspective in the coloring book. And I'm also working on volume 2 of The Journey of My Mother's Son, which will just it's really a story about the subtitle is Many Little People, and it'll just talk about people that we've met on this journey, whether it's people that I remember their name or people that we just had a short interaction with, but yet they still made a very profound effect on our lives, who I don't even remember their name anymore. So it'll just be a story about, you know, those people that we've met and how special that's been.
Describe to our audience, what's it like to have the freedom you now possess?
Boy, it's tough to put that into words. Um, but it is, um, it's just an amazing feeling to know that, this past summer we did a book signing tour throughout Colorado. It was our first time in Colorado. Um, and again, to kind of meet people. Um, if I was still working for the organization, still running the complex, like there's no way I could put together, a 6-week book signing tour in Colorado, certainly not in the summer. And I
Right,
wouldn't want to do it in the winter in
right.
Colorado.
Yeah,
So that freedom of being able to do that. And then, in early 2024, be doing another book signing tour throughout Louisiana and Texas, and into Arizona. And then we're doing a volunteer project in California in April. But yet there have also been times where, sadly we had a friend of ours pass away shortly um, into this journey, so to speak, and ended up making an impromptu trip back to Pennsylvania that we weren't um, planning on doing, but yet we had that freedom to be able to do that, and to be able to kind of, even though like right now we've got our plans pretty well laid out for just about all of 2024, which is very odd, but that's only because we're planning on going to Alaska for 3 months with some of our volunteer friends. We're taking a caravan up there. However, we also have the ability to shift, that if something would happen that we'd have to, you know, jump off of that trip to come home for some reason, or whatever the case is, we still have that freedom
yeah.
to be able to do that. So that's, to actually, it's tough to put it into words, but um, it is it's nice to be able to, kind of shift gears if we have to.
I guess you could use the word enjoyable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt about that. No doubt
D-
about that.
Dan, how did your dog react from living in a house to an RV?
He probably loves it even more than my wife and I do.
Really?
He's a 14 and a half year old golden retriever, and he loves the fact that, you know on any given day he can wake up and be on a beach or be in the mountains, or out on a trail meeting people. He loves meeting people. um, so he loves it, definitely more than even my wife and I do, because um, he understands the freedom too, I think.
Yeah, sounds that way. Can you tell us just a few of your volunteering venues you worked in? Uh, I know you worked in Lake Charles, Louisiana after Hurricane Laura, but any interesting stories?
Yes, we actually we ended up going back to Lake Charles, as part of, when the first time we went there is basically just Sandy and I. um, and because we had friends down there, they got us in touch with the local church that was running the distribution center, for supplies. We ended up going back to Lake Charles in February of 2022, and this was with a year to volunteer, and actually went into Sam Houston Jones State Park, which was a state park in Lake Charles that had just been totally devastated by the hurricane. It still wasn't open to the public at this point, and so again, you're talking August of 2020 um, is when the hurricane came through. We're now looking at February of 2022, and this park had still been closed. They'd lost 90% of their trees. Um, and we went in there. This was actually the largest group to do a project for a year to volunteer, and we rebuilt campsites for them. We built a brand new um, fishing pier for them, 500-foot fishing pier. We were still
Wow.
cleaning up debris. Over 2 years, almost 2 years after the hurricane, there was still just debris everywhere. So we, probably picked up, 2,000 plus sticks,
Yeah.
stump grinded. I mean, just there's I think two teams just grinding stumps every day. I don't even know what the final number was on stumps. And then just painting, and we did a ton of painting. Completely rebuilt the entranceway to the park. Um, and then the cool thing about that is Sandy and I have been back to that park now that is open to the public 2 times, because again we do have friends down in that area. So to kind of see the progression. A lot of times if you do a project like that, you get to it, you leave, and that's it. Where here we've been able to, we were there the first time, not in the park, just kind of seeing, right after everything had happened.
Yeah.
Now we've been able to come back and see how things continue to build up, and um, getting into the park and seeing people using some of the things that we've built is pretty rewarding. Um, and then just during the project, seeing how the community just really embraced what we were doing. We had several different church groups. The Chamber of Commerce would come out and bring us meals. Normally meals are all on our own during a project. I think we cooked 3 nights total because we would just have people coming out,
Yeah. That's great.
sending us down to the pavilion and bringing food, and then hearing their stories of how grateful they were, for this group of volunteers from all over the country to come in and spend time in their park, and what that park meant to them. It was literally like a generational thing where, this one woman was telling us, when she was a child, her grandmother used to bring her to the park, and then, her
Yeah.
mother, and, so, and here, my kids haven't had this park for almost 2 years now, and here you guys are, bringing it back so that I can bring my kids back here and they can experience that same thing that I did as a kid, and grandmother did as a kid, and her grandmother did as a kid, and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty special. And then the other project that always sticks in our mind is the first project we did with the Year to Volunteer up in Antigo, Wisconsin. We volunteered at a place called the Raptor Education Group. Actually, I'm wearing the shirt right now. Wasn't really planning on talking about it, but just happened to have the shirt. Um, Also called Reggie, and it's it's a raptor sanctuary where they bring in injured eagles and falcons and just all kinds of birds. Um, and the idea is to rehab them and send them back out into the wild. It's not always the case. Not all the birds can be set free. So at that point, they keep them there and just care for them throughout their life. The first project we did there, the oldest living bald eagle from the Exxon Valdez oil spill, was actually living on this property, and the
Wow.
founder of the organization had rescued it during the oil spill and actually um, brought her back there. And at that time, the bird was over 50 years old. She's now since passed. Um, but, again, just very cool to see that. And then we've been able to see, um, bald eagles being set free, been able to see falcons and hawks set free after they've been rehabilitated. And it's just, again, it's just an incredible thing to, watch these birds who came in broken, um, get rehabilitated and then set back into the
Yeah.
wild is pretty.
Yeah. The work you're doing is just amazing. What is the RV community at large like? Can you just give us an idea?
It's just, you know probably the best way to describe it is just kind of like old school. Always willing to help, lend a hand. um, we were on a volunteer project, actually the one in Lake Charles at Sam Houston Jones, and our water pump went out, and um, there were 3 or 4 guys there who, showed me how to change it out. One of them had a spare water pump, gave it to me. All I had to do is, order a replacement for him from Amazon, but that way we could get up and running, that
Yeah.
we didn't have to wait a couple days to get the part. Um, and again, they didn't do the work for me. They showed me how to do it so that in the future, I could be able to do it on my own, which I tell everybody all the time that I'm probably the least handy full-time RVer out there. So if you would have ever told me in 2019 or early 2020 that I'd be changing my own water pump, I'd have told you I doubt that's going to happen. But sure enough, there I was changing my own water pump, which being tutored by others, but still doing the work. And it's I remember when I was a kid. Um, and my mom would send me to our neighbor's house for a stick of butter or something, or a cup of sugar, or them coming to our house for a stick of butter or a cup of sugar. Like that's what I kind of equate the RV community as. Like if you need something, somebody's there willing to help you out. We one of our first trips, we were up in New Hampshire, and we don't tow a vehicle. Um, and we got into our campsite, and our neighbors, um, they had learned from the campground owner that we weren't towing a vehicle. And the next day we hear a knock on our door, and here it's our neighbors. And they said, "Hey, we're going into town. We know you guys don't have a vehicle, and the camp store is closed. Do you guys need anything? We'd be happy to pick it up for you." And as it turned out, we did need like milk and eggs or something, because when we didn't realize that the campground store would be closed when we got there, so we didn't actually do a supply stop before we got into the campground, which we normally do. We were like, "Oh, let's just get it at the camp store." We got there, it was closed. So and then they ended up going in, running in town, and grabbing some stuff for us, and just stuff like that. you know so it just kind of reminds me of my childhood, and how communities really kind of banded together, even though we're all on our separate ways. Once we come together, like everybody's willing to help out with
Yeah.
something.
It sounds like a great community. What places in the US and Canada do you and your wife want to visit to fulfill your bucket list? Because I know you're all over the
um
place.
yeah, Alaska is definitely, when we get to Alaska next year, that's definitely a bucket list thing for sure. And we'll get to see a large part of Canada there. We've only been to Niagara Falls so far in Canada, and we love that. So we're looking forward to going up through BC and the Northwest Territory on our way into Alaska. So those are definitely bucket lists. You know, it's so hard because it's such a beautiful country. We've been to 45 states so far, um, and we'll probably end up with Alaska next year, and we'll hit California next year and Nevada. We've been to Nevada, but not during our RV travels, so we don't kind of count that one yet. Um, we'll probably end up with all the 49 um, after next year, and it's tough to say what's on the bucket list because it's ever changing, because we'll get into an area, and one of our other full-time friends will be like, "Hey, were you planning on going to Scotts Bluff in Nebraska?" And we weren't. And we're like, "Okay, well, let's go check it out." And it was a really cool spot, one of the Pony Express stops, and learning that history. um so the bucket list is ever changing. And then
Okay.
there's so many places that we've been to where you know we felt we didn't have enough time there. And so now getting back there is added to the bucket list. Like when we went through Colorado, we saw a ton, but we also left there with a list of as many places that we didn't see that we want to go back to.
Well, we have a lot of listeners of this podcast in Canada. So when we give out your contact information, all our Canadian friends might want to get a hold of Dan and tell him some good places in Canada to visit.
Absolutely. I'm always willing to take advice.
Yeah. What has surprised you most about your new lifestyle?
um I think, again, just the people we've met. you know um I don't know that surprised is the right word, because that was one of the things my mom talked about so much, was just the people that she met in her travels, and stayed in contact with them, and even ones that she didn't stay in contact with. And I just think, again, in the polarized society that we live in now, the ability to sit down and have conversations with people who probably don't share the same political beliefs as I do, probably don't necessarily have you know we all have the same wants and desires when you really break it down. Once you cut through all the other crap that mainstream media wants to throw at us and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, if you actually sit down and take the time to have a conversation with someone,
Yeah.
you can put all that other stuff to the side and realize, what? Yeah, we really do want the same things.
Yeah.
Um,
So you've learned
so
that.
I think that's the biggest thing for sure.
Now, I just want to give you a little plug. You've written a couple of books about your travels. One's titled The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1. We have another book, Four Paws and Six Wheels Across America, The Adventures of, this is named after a baseball player, the Eucalyptus, right?
Yeah. Eucalyptus. Yep.
Yeah, the
Yep.
Golden Retriever. Just kind of briefly tell us a little bit about those books.
So the journey of my mother's son, that'll be part of a four-part series. Volume one, the subtitle is "Many Random Thoughts from the Road," and it really is exactly that. It's just kind of chronicles our first 18 months of living on the road, and the cool thing about that book is you can pick it up and you could read um, chapter 18 first, and then go back and read chapter 5, because it really is random thoughts from the road. So um, it's published chronologically, by the dates that I've written those stories. Um, but whether it's something that inspired me on a hike, or a sunset, or a walk on the beach, or again someone we met, or a volunteer project that we did, that's really what that book is about. And then, like I said, I'm working on volume 2 of that, which will be Many Little People, which will again talk about the people we've met throughout our journey. And then the third volume will be Many Little Places, which will try to highlight, um, you know, our favorite places, so to speak. But
Yeah.
the toughest thing with the volume 2 and 3 is like what doesn't get in the book. Like at some point you got to say, okay, this has got to be the end of the
Yeah.
book. So
Yeah.
um, so that'll be that. Then the fourth volume of that is basically just a coffee table book, a picture book of, again, just photos that my wife and I have taken, um, on our travels and places that we've been. And then the children's book, um, Four Paws and Six Wheels Across America. I talked a little bit about it earlier. It's just our dog's perspective, as though he was the author, and what he loves most about traveling in the RV.
Yeah.
And then my first book, the one that I first published in 2012 and then republished in 2021, was The Beauty of a Diamond Through the Eyes of a Coach, which really chronicles my 30 years of coaching baseball and softball, and really teaching those life lessons through the game. So, um, you know, I personally think they're all very good books, and I've gotten very good reviews on them. So, hopefully, some of the listeners will want to check them out.
Yeah. I want to check that one out. Four Paws and Six Wheels. I think that would be really interesting to read. You also host your own podcast, The Journey of My Mother's Son. Tell us a little bit of what that's about.
So, as I had mentioned, I had podcasted for our organization since 2012. Um, I loved being able to tell stories. So one of the things that I wanted to do when we started traveling was to be able to tell stories to people we met. One of the things that I thought of was how cool it would have been for my mom to be able to tell some of those stories in real time through social media and through a platform like podcasting, as opposed to us, reading through her journals after she had passed away, and receiving letters from people that we had never met that told us about the impact that she had on their lives.
Right.
So I talked to my producer, and found out, when I did the the podcast for the organization. All I did was conduct the interview. I had no idea how it got to the, to Google or Spotify or Apple or any of that stuff. I just, got a link after I did the interview. So she was gracious enough to kind of show me the back end of it. And, I've been able to, have people on my show that we've just met in campsites that we did volunteer projects with. And now I've kind of expanded a little bit where, I'll have a lot of guests on that I haven't necessarily met in person at this point, but I'll do an interview with them, and then I actually am able to kind of connect with them in person down the road at some point, which has been pretty cool. I've been able to do that with probably a dozen or so guests or people who have had me on their show, again, which is really neat. So it's there's I'll have everything from former athletes, to volunteers to life coaches and all that sort of stuff. But I the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places. So I do ask all my guests the same final question, which is, what are one of the little things that you do to make the world a better place on a daily basis? So that's kind of the one common theme throughout all of my shows is I ask the guests the same final question.
Okay, sounds like a great show. So everybody listening to this show, tune into his podcast, Journey of My Mother's Son. Now, for those out there in the audience listening to this and wanting to better their lives by making a change, what words of advice do you have for them? They want to make their lives better.
First and foremost, just do it. Like you can come up with 100 reasons why not to do something and talk yourself out of it very quickly.
Yeah.
But I think you just need to, cut through all the crap and all the garbage and all the, limiting beliefs and just do it. I mean, like I said, I could have told myself a million times I never drove an RV. I don't know anything about RVing. I'm doing great work with the organization that I'm working in. We're changing lives, but we just had to take the leap. So I think that's the big thing is just, don't talk yourself out of it. Just go ahead and do it, and realize that, you're never going to be as young as you are today. Like that's just it.
That's true.
So
yeah,
you can keep, don't talk about doing it next month or next year or 5 years from now, because, sadly, you don't know if you have next week, next month, or 5 years from now. It's just the cold hard truth of being a human.
take the leap. Just do it. Dan, how can people contact you?
So you can just go to my website, which is journeymymotherson.com, or danclouser.com. They both go to the same site. From there, you can get links to my books, my podcasts, blogs, all that sort of stuff. All my social media links are on my website. So it's just the easiest thing is just go right to my website, and from there you can kind of navigate what direction you want to go to find out more from there.
Okay, so we're going to repeat that. It's danclouser.com and journeyofmymotherson.com. And
Yep.
we will include that in the podcast notes. So we'll put that in the notes. I want to thank you, Dan, for being on the podcast and sharing your story and inspiring all of us with your leap of faith decision to change your lifestyle and make this world a better place. I wish you and your wife and Eucalyptus all the best going forward. So thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me on, Ron. I appreciate the time.
Comments and suggestions for the podcast, you can email me at itsarapwithrap@gmail.com. Our Facebook group is It's a Rap with Rap. So if you want to get in the group, I think we have a couple thousand members right now. Just get in touch with us on Facebook. Instagram is It's a Rap with Rap podcast. We are on Twitter. They call it X now, and it's at Rapper130. So that's at WRAPPER 130. We're on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. All the episodes are on there. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. I want to thank everyone for listening. Everybody, please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap.